Jack Ma was once a symbol of impossibility turned into reality. A man who failed his university entrance exam not once, but twice. A man rejected from more than 30 jobs, including a job at KFC where everyone else was hired except him. A man who didn't understand technology, didn't come from money, didn't have connections, and yet believed in something most people laughed at. He believed that the internet would change everything, and that ordinary people could use it to compete with giants. When Jack Ma started Alibaba from his apartment with a handful of friends, there was no guarantee of success. There was only belief, persistence, and an almost unreasonable level of optimism. For years, he was ignored. For years, he struggled, but slowly, the world began to notice. Alibaba grew into a monster of innovation. It empowered small businesses, connected global markets, and rewrote the rules of commerce. Jack Ma became one of the most admired entrepreneurs on earth. He spoke at global forums, advised governments, inspired millions of young people, and stood as proof that failure was not the end. It was the beginning. As Alibaba expanded, so did Jack Ma's confidence. His company was no longer just successful, it was dominant. Ant Group, Alibaba's financial arm, was on track to launch what would have been the largest IPO in history. Trillions of dollars were connected to this ecosystem. Millions depended on it. Investors trusted it. The world applauded it. Jack Ma had reached a level of influence where his words could move markets and shape opinions. And that's where something subtle but dangerous began to happen. Success started to feel permanent. Power started to feel secure. Winning started to feel normal. When you stay at the top long enough, it's easy to forget how fragile that position actually is. It's easy to mistake momentum for immunity. Then came the moment that changed everything. At a public forum, Jack Ma openly criticized financial regulators. He dismissed traditional banking systems. He spoke boldly, almost dismissively, about institutions that had existed long before Alibaba and would exist long after it. To some, it sounded visionary. To others, it sounded reckless. What mattered wasn't just what he said. It was where, how, and to whom he said it. Within days, the tone around Jack Ma shifted. Within weeks, Ant Group's historic IPO was suspended. Investigations followed. Fines were imposed. Regulations tightened. Alibaba's market value collapsed. Hundreds of billions of dollars evaporated. Jack Ma vanished from public view. The man who once couldn't stop talking to the world suddenly went silent. This wasn't a failure of intelligence. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't bad luck. It was a reminder of a rule that applies to everyone, no matter how successful they become. No individual is bigger than the system they operate in. Power exists within boundaries. Influence exists within permission. Even visionaries must understand context. Jack Ma didn't lose because he was wrong about innovation. He lost because timing, humility, and awareness matter just as much as brilliance. When success removes your sense of risk, it replaces it with blind spots. And blind spots are expensive. The most dangerous thing about success is not failure. It's overconfidence. Most people never reach the top, so they never learn how slippery it can be. They believe the climb is the hardest part, but staying there requires something different. It requires restraint. It requires listening more than speaking. It requires knowing when to push and when to pause. Jack Ma's story shows us that winning too much for too long can distort perspective. When applause surrounds you constantly, criticism feels unnecessary. When everything you touch turns to gold, warnings sound like noise. That's how even the smartest people can miscalculate. But this story is not about humiliation or judgment. It's about awareness. It's about understanding that success is not a shield. It doesn't protect you from consequences. It doesn't excuse mistakes. It doesn't rewrite the rules. If anything, success raises the stakes. Every move becomes heavier. Every word carries more weight. The higher you rise, the more carefully you must walk. Jack Ma's fall wasn't instant, but its impact was massive. Wealth disappeared. Influence faded. Freedom narrowed. And the silence that followed was louder than any speech he ever gave. If you're listening to this and thinking this story is only about billionaires, you're missing the point. This applies to every level of life. When you start winning, whether in business, career, social media, or personal growth, the same danger exists. The moment you think you've figured everything out is the moment you stop growing. The moment you believe you're untouchable is the moment you stop paying attention. Arrogance doesn't always show up as ego. Sometimes it shows up as comfort. Sometimes it shows up as ignoring feedback. Sometimes it shows up as speaking when you should be learning. Jack Ma once said that smart people need foolish people to work for them, and wise people know how to work with others. What this chapter of his life teaches is that wisdom is not static. It must be renewed constantly. You don't earn humility once and keep it forever. You practice it daily. You protect it deliberately because the world doesn't punish ambition. It punishes carelessness. It doesn't hate success. It tests it. So here is the real question you should be asking yourself right now. Not how do I become successful, but who will I become when I am successful? Will you still listen? Will you still adapt? Will you still respect the forces around you? Or will you assume the rules no longer apply? Because history is full of people who climbed fast and fell faster, not because they lacked talent, but because they forgot balance. If you are building something right now, build it with awareness. If you are winning right now, stay grounded. If you feel powerful right now, stay curious. And if you are struggling right now, understand this failure can teach you things success never will. Jack Ma's rise inspires millions. His fall warns millions. Both are valuable, but only if you choose to learn. And now here's the moment where this stops being just a story and becomes a decision. Don't just listen to this and move on. Use it, apply it, audit your mindset, check your ego, strengthen your discipline. Whether you have 10 followers or 10 million, act like someone who still has something to prove. Stay hungry but stay humble. Chase greatness, but respect the ground you're standing on. If this message challenged you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs a reminder. If you're serious about growth, commit right now to learning more, listening more, and leading with awareness. Because success is not about becoming untouchable, it's about becoming unstoppable without losing yourself. Jack Ma didn't wake up one morning planning to lose power, influence, and hundreds of billions in value. No one ever does. Decline never announces itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as confidence, wrapped in years of success. For decades, Jack Ma fought uphill battles. He knew rejection intimately. He knew embarrassment. He knew what it felt like to be underestimated. Those experiences forged resilience, creativity, and hunger. They made him dangerous in the best possible way. But what happens when the struggle disappears? What happens when doors no longer resist you? When people stop saying no? When applause replaces opposition? That's when the real test begins, and it's a test very few are prepared for. As Alibaba transformed into a global force, Jack Ma's identity slowly shifted. He was no longer just a founder or entrepreneur. He became a symbol, a national icon, a global voice. His opinions carried weight far beyond business. Governments listened. Media amplified him. Young people quoted him like scripture. And over time, success began to do what it does best when left unchecked. It created distance from reality. Not intentional distance, comfortable distance, the kind where feedback gets filtered, warnings get softened, and criticism gets reframed as jealousy or ignorance. When you win long enough, you start believing your instincts are always right, not because they are, but because they've worked before. The system Jack Ma operated in had rules, limits, and boundaries that were invisible when things were going well. Growth hides tension, expansion hides friction, but pressure doesn't disappear. It accumulates. Ant Group's rise wasn't just innovation. It was disruption at a scale that made institutions nervous. And when institutions get nervous, they don't react emotionally. They react structurally. The problem wasn't ambition. The problem wasn't vision. The problem was misreading power. Speaking boldly is celebrated in entrepreneurship, but context determines consequence. A sentence said in one room inspires applause. The same sentence said in another triggers alarms. When the regulatory pushback came, it shocked the world not because it was impossible, but because people assumed it wouldn't happen. That assumption is the most expensive belief anyone can hold. Markets erased value overnight. Confidence collapsed. Momentum reversed, and Jack Ma disappeared not just physically but symbolically. Silence replaced certainty. Absence replaced authority. And suddenly, everyone who once said he was unstoppable began rewriting the narrative. That's another brutal truth of success. Loyalty thins when gravity returns. Applause is loud on the way up and quiet on the way down. This moment exposes something deeper than economics or politics. It exposes how success can distort self-perception. When your wins stack high enough, you start believing you're the exception to the rule instead of the result of it. You forget how many variables worked in your favor. You forget timing. You forget support. You forget restraint. You confuse courage with invincibility. And the world has a way of correcting that confusion, not out of cruelty, but out of balance. Power always seeks equilibrium. Jack Ma's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. The qualities that help you rise can become liabilities if they're not recalibrated. Confidence becomes arrogance, vision becomes tunnel vision, boldness becomes recklessness, and intelligence without humility becomes fragile. This isn't a flaw unique to billionaires. It happens at every level. It happens to managers who stop listening to their teams, creators who stop respecting their audience, entrepreneurs who stop studying the market, individuals who stop questioning themselves. The higher you climb, the more dangerous certainty becomes. What makes this story painful is not the loss of money. Money returns in different forms. What hurts is the loss of control, the loss of voice, the loss of agency. The realization that no matter how much you build, how smart you are, or how admired you become, you are still operating inside forces larger than you. That realization humbles even the strongest minds. It forces reflection. It forces recalibration. And sometimes it forces silence. But silence is not the end. Silence is the space where learning either happens or pride dies. And this is where the lesson becomes personal. Because every person listening to this will face a version of this moment, maybe not with billions, maybe not on a global stage, but in your career, your business, your influence, your relationships. There will be a moment where things go well for long enough that you stop checking yourself, where you stop asking hard questions, where you start assuming tomorrow will look like today. That's the moment you need to remember this story. Most people think failure comes from weakness. It doesn't. It often comes from strength that outgrows awareness. The world doesn't punish ambition. It punishes arrogance disguised as certainty. It doesn't reject innovation. It resists disruption that ignores structure. You don't lose because you dream big. You lose because you forget to stay adaptable while dreaming big. Jack Ma once inspired people by saying that opportunities lie where complaints are. What this chapter teaches is that warnings often hide where praise is loudest. When everyone agrees with you, question it. When success feels effortless, examine it. When you feel untouchable, ground yourself immediately. Because the fall doesn't come from enemies. It comes from miscalculation. And now, this is where responsibility shifts to you. Don't consume this story like entertainment. Don't treat it like gossip or history. Treat it like a mirror. Ask yourself where you've become comfortable. Ask yourself where you've stopped listening. Ask yourself where you assume immunity instead of accountability. Then act today, not tomorrow. Tighten your discipline. Strengthen your awareness. Surround yourself with people who challenge you, not flatter you. Study the systems you operate in instead of just trying to conquer them. If this message shook you even a little, that's your signal. Don't ignore it. Share it with someone who needs grounding. Apply it to your next decision. Subscribe to growth that includes humility, not just ambition. Commit right now to becoming someone who can handle success without losing perspective. Because the goal is not to rise fast. The goal is to rise wisely. And if you want to win long term, start today by mastering the one thing success can't give you on its own self: awareness. Jack Ma's story doesn't break people because of how high he rose. It unsettles them because of how suddenly gravity returned. One moment, he was everywhere. His voice echoed across conferences, classrooms, boardrooms, and governments. His ideas shaped how millions thought about failure, opportunity, and entrepreneurship. He made people believe that background didn't matter, that English teachers could become billionaires, that rejection was simply training. That belief was real. That belief was earned. And that belief carried him far beyond where most people ever reach. But success has a shadow side that doesn't show up in motivational quotes. It shows up when power becomes normal, when influence feels permanent, and when silence seems impossible because you've grown accustomed to being heard. The longer someone stays successful, the less friction they experience. Doors open faster. Conversations become easier. Criticism softens. People hesitate before disagreeing. And slowly, almost invisibly, reality begins to bend. Not because the person demands it, but because the environment adjusts around them. This is where danger grows. Not in ego, but in insulation. Jack Ma didn't lose awareness overnight. He lost it gradually, cushioned by years of winning. When every move you've made turns into a success story, your confidence stops being tested, and confidence that isn't tested becomes assumption. In systems built on balance, assumption is costly. Jack Ma operated inside a structure where innovation was encouraged, but boundaries were firm. Where disruption was welcomed, but defiance was not. Where speed was admired, but control was non-negotiable. The mistake wasn't speaking honestly. The mistake was misunderstanding the moment. There is a difference between courage and confrontation, between leadership and provocation. And when that line is crossed publicly, consequences don't negotiate. They arrive decisively. The aftermath was not loud. It was quiet, and that quiet was more powerful than any backlash. Silence removes leverage. Silence removes narrative. Silence allows others to define your story while you watch. For someone who built their life on expression, silence is not just absence. It's loss, and this is the part of the story that rarely gets discussed. What does it feel like to go from shaping conversations to being removed from them? What does it do to someone who once believed in speaking freely to realize that restraint has become survival? This is where fear enters, not fear of failure, but fear of irrelevance, fear of misstepping again. Fear of being misunderstood one more time. And fear is not weakness. Fear is information. It tells you that the terrain has changed, that the rules have shifted, that adaptation is now more important than expression. For someone like Jack Ma, adaptation required something far harder than building a company. It required undoing parts of an identity that had been rewarded for decades. Power doesn't disappear suddenly. It erodes, it narrows, it becomes conditional, and the most painful part is that it happens while the world is watching, analyzing, speculating, judging. People who once celebrated your boldness now criticize your restraint. People who once wanted your advice now question your relevance. That reversal tests character in ways failure never does, because failure still allows hope. Silence forces reflection. This story exposes a truth most people never prepare for. Success doesn't end struggle, it changes its shape. Early struggle is external, late struggle is internal. Early struggle is about proving yourself. Late struggle is about controlling yourself. Early struggle is loud, late struggle is quiet, and many people who master the first never develop the skills for the second. Jack Ma mastered growth, vision, and resilience. What challenged him was calibration. Calibration is the ability to adjust without losing direction, to step back without surrendering, to listen without disappearing, to survive without becoming small. That skill is not taught in business schools. It's not praised on social media. It doesn't trend, but it determines longevity. Without it, even the strongest empires weaken. If you think this story is extreme, look closer at your own life. Look at how success changes behavior. The first promotion, the first viral moment, the first big win. The first time people stop questioning you, that's where the risk begins. Not when things are hard, but when they're easy. Not when you're ignored, but when you're admired. Not when you're failing, but when you're comfortable. Comfort dulls awareness faster than fear ever could. Jack Ma's experience reminds us that influence is not ownership. Visibility is not control, and confidence is not immunity. You don't get to opt out of systems just because you helped improve them. You don't get to rewrite rules just because you benefited from breaking some of them. Progress requires negotiation, not domination. And wisdom requires restraint, not just courage. The silence that followed wasn't punishment. It was correction. A reset. A reminder that power must align with structure or it collapses. And whether Jack Ma returns to the spotlight fully or not is less important than what this moment teaches. It teaches that success without self-regulation is temporary. That voice without awareness is fragile. That ambition without discipline eventually contradicts itself. Now here's the part where this becomes uncomfortable because it points directly at you. Where are you speaking when you should be listening? Where are you pushing when you should be adjusting? Where are you relying on past wins instead of present awareness? These questions are not meant to slow you down. They are meant to protect you. Because unchecked momentum feels good, but it often leads straight into walls you didn't see coming. If you are building something right now, build with humility wired into your process. If you are leading people, listen twice as much as you speak. If you are gaining influence, study the environment that allows it to exist. And if you feel powerful, pause long enough to remember that power is borrowed, not owned. Do not let this story end as something you heard and forgot. Let it disrupt your habits. Let it sharpen your decisions. Let it humble your confidence without killing your ambition. Share this message with someone who is rising fast. Apply it before you're forced to learn it the hard way. Follow voices that challenge you, not just those that praise you. And make a commitment right now to becoming the kind of person who can hold success without being consumed by it. Because the world doesn't need more people who rise quickly. It needs more people who know how to stay upright when the ground starts shifting. Jack Ma's story is not frightening because of how much value disappeared. It's frightening because of how easily certainty vanished. For years, everything around him reinforced the same message. You are right, you are winning, you are necessary. When success repeats itself long enough, it stops feeling earned and starts feeling deserved. That's the moment reality becomes negotiable in your mind. Jack Ma didn't see himself as reckless. He saw himself as honest. He didn't think he was crossing lines. He thought the lines no longer applied to him in the same way. That belief doesn't come from arrogance alone. It comes from momentum. It comes from years of proof. It comes from living inside a narrative where every risk you take turns into a legend people retell. The problem with living inside a legend is that you forget it's still being written by forces you don't control. Systems don't care about your intentions. They respond to impact. Jack Ma believed innovation should move faster than regulation. That belief made sense in a startup world, but scale changes everything. When you affect millions, when capital flows depend on your structure, when stability becomes part of your responsibility, freedom narrows whether you accept it or not. That transition is where many leaders fail. They don't realize that the rules change when the game gets bigger. They keep playing like rebels when they've already become institutions. What makes this story heavy is that Jack Ma wasn't ignorant. He was intelligent, experienced, and globally aware. But intelligence doesn't cancel blind spots. In fact, intelligence can deepen them because it gives you better arguments for your own assumptions. When you're used to being right, you stop checking yourself. When your ideas build empires, you stop imagining resistance. When your words inspire millions, you forget that words also threaten structures. And structures, unlike people, do not forgive easily. The aftermath exposed something deeply human. Control is an illusion we borrow from consistency. As long as tomorrow looks like today, we believe we are in charge. But the moment the pattern breaks, we realize how much was never ours. Jack Ma didn't lose everything, but he lost certainty. He lost predictability. He lost the ability to move freely in a world he once navigated effortlessly. That loss hits harder than financial decline because it attacks identity. When your identity is built on influence and voice, restriction feels like erasure. There's a quiet psychological cost to that kind of shift. You start replaying moments, conversations, choices. You ask yourself where the turning point was. You wonder whether silence would have been smarter than honesty, whether patience would have been stronger than courage. And that questioning doesn't stop when the cameras turn away. It stays with you. It reshapes how you think, how you speak, how you trust your own instincts. That's the part people don't see, the internal recalibration that success never prepared you for. This is why Jack Ma's story matters beyond headlines, because most people are taught how to chase success, not how to survive it. We celebrate ambition, confidence, disruption, boldness. We rarely talk about restraint, timing, alignment, and consequence. We train people to break ceilings, but not to understand what holds the roof up. And when someone finally hits it, the shock is devastating. The most dangerous belief any successful person can hold is that past victories guarantee future safety. They don't. They only increase expectations. The higher you rise, the less margin for error you have. The room for experimentation shrinks. The tolerance for misjudgment disappears. What once made you admirable can suddenly make you vulnerable. Jack Ma's strength wasn't the problem. The inability to downshift that strength was. If you strip this story down to its core, it's not about one man or one country or one company. It's about the universal tension between expression and structure. Every system has limits. Every environment has thresholds. Ignoring them doesn't make you brave. It makes you exposed. The world doesn't collapse people for dreaming too big. It corrects those who stop respecting complexity. And here's where it becomes personal. Because this pattern shows up everywhere. In careers, in businesses, in influence, in relationships. The moment you think I've earned this, I can say what I want, do what I want, act how I want, is the moment you stop reading the room. It's the moment you stop adapting. And adaptation is not weakness. It's intelligence in motion. Refusing to adapt is not strength. It's rigidity, and rigid things break. Jack Ma's silence after the storm was not defeat. It was adjustment. And adjustment is painful when you're used to acceleration. Slowing down feels like losing. Listening feels like shrinking. But sometimes survival requires humility disguised as patience. The world doesn't reward people who are loud forever. It rewards those who understand when to speak and when to step back. This story is uncomfortable because it forces a question most people avoid. Not how far can I go, but what happens if I go too far without recalibrating? That question doesn't kill ambition. It sharpens it. It turns reckless momentum into sustainable power. And sustainability is what separates flashes from legacies. Right now, somewhere in your life, you are either rising, stabilizing, or declining. Wherever you are, this lesson applies. If you are rising, ground yourself now before the ground is forced under your feet. If you are stable, don't confuse balance with immunity. If you are declining, don't confuse correction with the end. Every phase demands awareness. Every phase demands humility. Do not admire this story from a distance. Use it. Audit your behavior. Check how you respond to criticism. Notice whether you seek challenge or comfort. Pay attention to whether you're listening to people who disagree with you or only those who reinforce you. These small habits determine whether success strengthens you or weakens you. And now comes the moment where intention must turn into action. Don't let this be just another speech you heard and forgot. Decide today to become someone who can hold power without being blinded by it. Share this message with someone who's winning fast and needs grounding. Apply it to your next big decision. Commit to learning the rules of the systems you operate in, not just how to beat them. Follow growth that values awareness as much as ambition. And if you truly want long-term success, make this your rule from this moment forward. Never let momentum replace mindfulness. Never let confidence erase curiosity. And never let success convince you that you no longer need to adapt.